It is August at Oregon State University, and the international students in this classroom are busy preparing for fall term. Today, they are learning how to write papers that will meet American expectations. For them, completing an essay not only means operating in a language other than their native tongue, it also means operating in a cultural and educational system quite different than what they're used to. Jean Kaunda is familiar with the wide range of challenges that face international students as they write for American classrooms. Now finishing her PhD studies in public health, she notes that some of her experiences were frustrating.
One of my first essays in one of my nutritional class was to write this critical essay about a school lunch program in one of the middle school here in Corvallis. For me, it was hard because we were supposed to write to criticize the way they serve the foods to the children, whether it's nutritionally balanced, whether they follow the federal regulations, no? So for me, it was so hard to criticize, to write everything. Okay, they don't follow this, they are not supposed to do this, they don't do this. Because if I go back to my country, where I come from, Malawi, before 1994, it was so hard for us to criticize anything related to government. It was so hard because if we do that, most of the times people were arrested or something done to them by the government. So I didn't write it, critically the way my professor wanted it to be. So I got a bad grade on that one because I think it wasn't deep enough critically.
Despite the challenges that students like Jean face, international students continue to come to the United States to study in large numbers. In 2004, for example, over 600,000 students from other countries were studying in American colleges. Nationwide, that means that 1 in 20 students were from another country. At many schools, that number was closer to 1 in 10. But while the presence of international students is changing American classrooms, very little is done to prepare teachers. Most scholars would agree that research into culture and writing began with the publication of Robert Kaplan's 1966 article, Cultural Thought Patterns in Intercultural Education. In it, Kaplan introduced the idea of contrastive rhetoric, the notion that people use different rhetorics when they write within different cultures. He went so far as to draw diagrams representing how people from different cultures write. The article created a flurry of interest and research, but it also drew criticism about oversimplification and that it might lead people to think ethnocentrically. The consensus now is that while it's important not to make assumptions that all students from a particular country or region will all write alike, that it's just as important not to overlook culture either. By doing that, it's easy to assume that American preferences in writing are natural or the most logical way to do things, when they are in fact shaped by culture, political values, and educational practices, as well as a 2,000-year rhetorical tradition dating back to Plato and Aristotle. For students from other cultures and rhetorical traditions, the values and expectations of American writing are anything but natural.
The Japanese traditional writing style is a little bit different from American writing style, and the way I learned in my elementary school is Japanese essay should be divided into 4 parts, which is ki, sho, ten, ketsu. And there's a very famous Japanese poem that teaches us how to write Japanese essays, and this is the way what I learned. The title is the Daughters at String Shops, and key part is there are 2 daughters at the string shops in Osaka, and show part is the oldest daughter is 16 years old and the youngest daughter is 14 years old, and this is a 10 part. Japanese samurai will kill their enemy by arrows, and kid part is Japanese daughters at string shop will kill guys by their eyes. So in 10 part, we suddenly start talking about totally different things from the thesis. So readers can surprise, like what we are talking about is totally different from the story about the Japanese daughters. But when you come to the conclusion, you can see how this part is connected to the conclusion part. So 10 part takes very, very important role in Japanese essays. This is a way we get the attention from the reader.
What I have noticed is that Americans usually will introduce their main point or say exactly what they want to say right at the beginning. It's almost like organizing in the introduction their main point, and then they develop their main point. Well, in Ecuador, what we would like to do, or we sometimes tend to do, is that we don't present the main point at the beginning. We go around it and around it until we finally get to the point, which is in the middle. It's kind of like this idea of circularity, that we go around and around it until we get to it. A good example of this is if I want to talk about, let's say that yesterday I went to a party and two guys who were fighting got in a fight. This is how an Ecuadorian will tell the story. I will start by saying, remember Pablo? Remember how Pablo used to be in love with Mary? And remember Juan? Remember that he also liked Mary? Well, yesterday when we went to the party, they started drinking and, and I will go on and give you all these details. And maybe by the time I tell you, yes, Pablo and Juan got in a fight because of Mary, you already have a complete idea of, or almost 95% of what I'm trying to tell you. In the case of an American, if I meet somebody for coffee, and it's a good friend of mine, is an American, we sit down, she will just go ahead and tell me, yes, Anna, you know what happened yesterday? Juan and Pablo got in a fight because of Mary.
Organizational preference is perhaps the most visible way culture influences writing. That's why scholars like Kaplan focused on it. But culture influences writing in ways that go beyond organization. For example, on the most global level, it shapes reader expectations and helps define which writing practices are acceptable and which are not.
In Vietnam, you risk the chance of getting penalized if you go outside the classroom and put in extra information other than what's lectured in the class from the teachers. An example was when I was younger, I was given a topic of writing about a typical meeting in the classroom and just describing a class meeting. And so I was here in the classroom writing about the atmosphere of the class, and I thought that wasn't enough. So I looked out the windows and I started writing about the schoolyard, how peaceful it is during study hours. And I started mentioning about the trees and the leaves falling. And I got marked down for that because I wasn't supposed to write outside the classroom. In the United States, for example, in my history of medicine class, I didn't do very well as I thought I would on my first paper, because I didn't go outside the classroom and finding information to put down on my papers. So the main difference here is that extra information and the students' own opinions are so valuable in essays.
Well, I think Americans are really direct. Sometimes they seem to be rude to me, looking from a Colombian perspective. Let's see, when I'm walking on the street in Colombia, in Bogota, my city, if I meet somebody on the street, I stop, and if it's a man, I shake his hand. If it's a woman, I kiss her. Here, people just pass and they don't say hello. Sometimes they ask me, how are you doing? And they don't wait for my response. So I think that's kind of rude. And that I think that is reflected in the way Americans write papers. They go straight to the point. They don't take the time to establish a relationship between the writer and the reader, and I think that's important in my culture. Well, I have a personal example. 2 weeks ago, I wrote an email to my friends in Colombia, and I asked them when was the birthday of one of our friends. And I went straight to the point. I didn't say anything else. And their reply was, "You are so rude, so unpolite. You didn't ask us how we were doing. You didn't say anything about you." And they were right. They were completely right.
In American writing, it is very important for you to make everything very clear, but in Japanese writing, this is a bit different because readers are supposed to participate the story much more than American writing. It means that, for example, when in Japanese writing, there are so many pronouns, and there are so many pronouns, but this is reader's job to understand what this she is and what this he is and what this it refers to. And I tend to do that when I'm writing American, like English essays, and everyone asks me like who this he is and who this she is. I don't understand. But for me, guess what? This is your job to understand it. But this is a very different part. So in American writing, like writers have a lot of responsibility for their writing, but in Japanese writing, readers have more responsibility to understand and participate the story.
Khan, Pablo, and Maho illustrate just how much expectations can vary from culture to culture. But preferences for style and word choice can have an equally dramatic impact on written communication, particularly in an academic environment. For international students, the kind of voice, style, and tone that American instructors expect is often much different than what they've been taught or what feels natural.
In America, I have noticed that the writing professors want short, concrete, understandable sentences. That's the way to write your composition. But in Turkish, what we do is we use long and elaborate sentences because we think that it's more poetic and it flows better that way, and you read it for the sake of getting some kind of a pleasure out of it, not necessarily just to understand the point. And also, we pay attention to the fact that we need to have these essays look good. So we have different punctuations that are just designed for visual pleasure. Like 3 dots, when you write a sentence, you end it with 3 dots, it indicates that the thought goes on.
Actually, exaggeration is acceptable in the Arabic way. On the contrary, sometimes it's acceptable or preferred to use exaggeration. It helps the writer to write, it helps him to express his feelings and describe whatever he wants to describe, and to attract the reader to his writing. And the reader would think that the writer is a good writer. And as an example of that maybe like he has the money enough to fill the sea. Actually, nobody has money to fill the sea, but that's indicator that he is rich. Unfortunately, American teachers won't see this point of writing, and they would just take that the American way is the only way. No, there is a lot of ways in the world, and they might deduct points, or it might affect the evaluation of the student that he doesn't know how to write.
Well, I've noticed that citation is a very big part of academic paper here in the United States. People are very aware of the copyright issues, what the source is, where is it from, what picture is this magazine from, and very detailedly cite everything. But in China, it's not a big thing at all. I would just say, for example, in an article, I don't remember who said this, but this is, roughly the sentence, or just place a picture inside of an article without, citing the source. And the more I think about it, I think, a big part of the reason is because the culture differences. Because in China, we're so used to sharing everything, and we're a country with more than 5,000 years of Asian culture, and also on top of that, we're having communism. The idea of that is everybody's supposed to be able to sharing everything. So it's just very common and natural for people to think, it's okay to share. When I first got here and started my college education and started taking writing lessons, I was really surprised at all the formats and all the guidelines that I had to pay attention to, because you had to do everything in a certain way, like 12 font and double spacing and all these things that I had never learned before. I have never used a computer before I came here. And I was really surprised about that, because there's all these guidelines that you have to follow and all these formats that you have to pay attention to. But then again, America, we look up to the education system that they have in America because it's more free and it's more relaxed. So I was surprised to find out that they can be just as strict as our countries.
Addressing cultural issues isn't an easy task. It's difficult to determine when a student's cultural background is playing itself out in writing, and even more difficult to decide how much to adapt teaching style to accommodate cultural differences. However, one thing is clear: teachers cannot take for granted that all students, particularly those from other countries,